Well, the president has no constitutional authority to amend any law that's been passed by the United States Congress. I've made this argument time and again, and he's violated his own oath of office time and again. It says in Article 2, Section 3, the president shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Now, that term executed means enforce the law. It doesn't mean execute the law. It doesn't mean give the law the death penalty. But he has essentially done that with No Child Left Behind, Welfare to Work, immigration, where he created four classifications of people, four classes of people, and said they're going to be exempt from the application of immigration law enforcement. And by the way, I'm going to give them a work permit that I manufacture out of thin air so they can have a job while they're here until such time as Congress conforms with my idea, the president speaking, of what immigration law should be. That's the DREAM Act Light that we know about by now. And now all of that was bad, and we initiated a lawsuit against the president on the immigration piece. That litigation is Crane versus Napolitano. The lead plaintiff is the president of the ICE union, Chris Crane, who's been stellar on this topic matter. And it's moving its way through the federal court system. The decision so far is 9 out of 10 arguments that we made. The judge, Reed O'Connor in the Northern District of Texas, came down on our side. There's a little more dialogue to go on before that case can be completely resolved, but that's the immigration piece. I'm trying to convince my colleagues that our obligation when we take an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States is to stand up and oppose the unconstitutional violations of the president, do so with No Child Left Behind, whether you agree with the policy or not, do so with Welfare to Work for the same reason, with immigration and amnesty by edict. And now we're into something that should be very clear for everybody, and that's Obamacare. And the president said here in this city, March 28, 2011, when he was giving a speech to a high school here in D.C., he said, I know you want me to pass the DREAM Act by executive order. I don't have the authority to do that. And you've been studying the Constitution, you're smart students, you know, a little pandering of course, you know that it's the legislature, Congress passes the laws, I'm the executive branch, I enforce them, and it's the judicial branch's job to interpret them. Well, that's pretty good, that's pretty right down the center for a former adjunct constitutional law professor from the University of Chicago, sometime later to become a community organizer, I might add. And so I read that memo when it came out. And a little over a year later, that was March 28, 2011, and on June 15th, 2012, the president stepped out into the Rose Garden and he said, we aren't going to enforce these laws against these people because I disagree with them. Janet Napolitano, 2 hours earlier, had issued what we call now the Morton Memos, where they've said we're not going to enforce the law. That's what started the lawsuit. But whether you agree with these policies or not, when the president now has applied his contempt for his own oath of office to policies that he disagreed with, now he's gone another step, equally as unconstitutional, but so utterly obvious that anybody, not just in high school, but in third grade should figure this out. President Obama has a piece of legislation called Obamacare. I called it Obamacare a long time ago. He called it Obamacare on February 25th of 2009, I believe it was, at the Blair House for the first time. And so I thought, well, if he can use the name Obamacare, so can I, and I have. And we used it persistently, some would say relentlessly. And finally, the administration decided they would embrace the term, and now they use the term Obamacare. That's because it's the President's Health Care Act. And the President signed the bill, he worked for it, he pushed for it, he defended it, he made argument after argument. It's his bill. And he decided the other day that he's not going to enforce his own bill, that he's going to change the statute, the law that he signed into law that requires that the employer mandate be implemented in each month, shall be implemented in each month after December 31st, 2013. That means next January, he's compelled by law to implement the employer mandate. The president cannot suspend the application and the enforcement and the implementation of that law unless and until he would come to Congress and get our assent. What he's done and said, the president has legislated by press conference, he's legislated by executive edict, and now he's legislating by a memo that's posted on the website of the second in command of the U.S. Treasury. This is appalling. This is down the lines of the reasons that, this country separated from King George. And so now we have Congress that seems to have folks in leadership that don't want to address the constitutional problem that's created by this. They just say, well, we've got a little political opportunity here. Let's see if we can't repeal that portion or suspend it and suspend the individual mandate while we're at it. That's not good enough. This has to be about the Constitution. If we're going to let the president pick and choose and decide which laws that he's going to enforce, then there's no reason for a Congress. And then our republic starts to crack and crumble. This constitutional underpinnings are under threat with the imperial presidency of Barack Obama.
He chose to attempt to lift just the individual, the business mandate, the employer mandate, but not that for individuals and families. Does that tell you something?
Well, yes. Where is the political support for him? He's granted waiver after waiver. The people that had political power got waivers. A lot of the unions got waivers from Obamacare, and so did some of the larger companies that were able to make their case to the White House. Now, that I haven't drilled into the constitutionality of the waiver piece of this, but now he's given equivalent a 1-year suspension of the application and the implementation of his own law by presidential edict as communicated through second in command of the U.S. Treasury. So that means that now those who had an argument that they should get a waiver, the employers, which I think the whole bill should go, who has a higher moral standing? The employers that ask for a waiver, or the employees or the individuals that would come under the individual mandate? I think they're both of a similar philosophical and moral standing. And if I were going to bring something through this Congress, I would marry them both together. And then I'd add to that I would marry both of those pieces together of the employer mandate and the individual mandate. And then it's just possible that if they pass something like that, it might sink Obamacare. If I was confident that it would sink it, then I would be pushing that harder. But instead, I want to make sure that the message that comes out of this Congress is the president has violated the Constitution. And so I would suggest marry both of those together, employer mandate, employee mandate, with a resolution of rejection, of disapproval of the president's unconstitutional actions. That would be the composition that I'd be satisfied with, I think, before we bring any legislation through. We don't have very many tools to make a president enforce the law. Congress has the ability to appropriate, so we could, through the appropriations process, and be facing a government shutdown, what Harry Reid would bring about, or the president. We could shut off money to the White House, for example, but it won't pay to shut off the money that goes to the Secret Service that guards the security that lets high school children walk through there and experience the White House. So I guess we should do something that affects him. Louis Gohmert introduced a resolution that put some conditions on it and said that there will be no Secret Service detail and no money spent to guard the president while he's golfing. That sends a political message. It may not be the most practical. Those kind of things, he's doing political things to try to punish the American people because he doesn't like his idea of sequestration. And this would be something similar along that line. A bit petty, but it'd get the message across.